Well, let's analyze the situation. So disinformation is when something that is not true is deliberately released, that becomes disinformation. And then when somebody receives it and does not know it's a lie, it's a fabrication, and then shares with somebody else, that is misinformation. So the bigger problem is with disinformation, because that is where the bad intention lies. So journalism is a process of exploring and uncovering the truth. So the key, the basic of journalism aims to uncover what is not known, what is hidden, or what is concealed. But there are, of course, good journalists, not so good journalists, and bad journalists or bad media organizations. Media is a plural, so we get the good, the bad, and the ugly. So what we get is, in the media landscape, media ecosystem, you get all kinds of media products. And in fact, information is bigger than media. Now today, because of the digital transformation, most people are not only consumers of information, but they can also producers and publishers of information. The internet has enabled us to be both publishers and consumers of information. So media is no longer monopolizing information as they did for much of history. They are instead one of many players in this very crowded, very noisy landscape, information landscape. So media is, the good media is to set the standard of investigating, fact-checking and packaging what is true, what is verified, and what is relevant. And we do have media that continues to play by these fundamentals. There are also other sensationalist media, both in our part of the world as well as in the developed world. And there is a problem with such media. But then the freedom of expression is a basic human right, and the right to freedom of expression is where all of these players operate. So there is, of course, a responsibility to be responsible and to make sure that what each one says is true and verified. But not everyone plays by the same rules. So to sum up, to answer your question, media, some media is irresponsible and deliberately peddles what is not true, or what is half true, what is distorted. At the same time, media is one of the best ways of countering disinformation. Responsible, good journalism is the best way to counter this scourge of disinformation that is spreading and that is deepening. Disinformation or lies is as old as human communications itself. Humans have been lying to each other for as long as they've been communicating. I think we can safely presume that as much as they shared information, they also doctored that information. They took some away or added some as they transmitted information. So we can't be sure exactly when disinformation originated, but there have been specific examples of disinformation campaigns, organized, sustained efforts to spread lies in ancient Rome, for example. Rulers did this, and certain interest groups or lobby groups did it, and it was always to score a point. Now, rulers do it usually to manipulate public opinion. And then if you have an ideology, the proponents of that ideology do it again to win over everyone else and the competing ideologies. So for political reasons, for ideological, economic, or even strategic and geopolitical reasons, disinformation campaigns have been spread by different players for thousands of years. The more modern history of disinformation goes back about a century. The Soviet Union, the erstwhile Soviet Union, is what actually took these historical practices of taking liberties with the truth to a new level altogether. The Soviet Union in its early days realized that rhetoric alone is not enough to keep the vast country together. They needed to manipulate the public mind. So what the Soviet rulers did is they actually set up the modern world's first disinformation unit. In fact, the word disinformation is also derived, the English word is derived from a Russian word they coined. It is desinformatsiya, which meant propaganda, lies, and spreading these to manipulate public opinion. And the predecessor to the KGB, which was called GPU, set up an internal division for disinformatsiya in 1923. So very soon we'll be marking the centenary of that first actual state apparatus set up for disinformation purposes. And then when Stalin became the leader of the Soviet Union, he expanded these disinformation efforts. First during the Second World War and then during the Cold War with the West, the Soviet Union was using disinformation to keep its own citizens manipulated and also to mislead the rest of the world about Soviet accomplishments, about the faults and the excesses that the Soviets said were in the rest of the world. And so communism was propped up on disinformation. And then the demise of the Soviet Union did not mean the end of disinformation. That simply took another manifestation. And especially with the rise and spread of the global internet from the 1990s onwards, it has become possible for disinformation campaigns to be mounted with relatively modest efforts and have a global reach. And this is being done by political manipulators, for example, to influence in elections. The best known example is the US presidential election of 2016, which is now, it has been proven that disinformation spread against candidate Hillary Clinton was one of the reasons that contributed, one among many that contributed to her electoral loss. And not just in the US, but the Brexit referendum in the UK and elections in the developed as well as developing countries, there have been recent examples of manipulating public opinion through disinformation campaigns, mounted both through the internet as well as sometimes through the more established media, television for example. Television driven disinformation narratives are quite common in many places including Sri Lanka. So the history of disinformation is interesting to study but also to learn lessons from. How much public opinion can be manipulated, how much world opinion can be manipulated, and the consequences of that, the dire consequences in the case of elections, for example. Regimes can be changed, the whole forward march of a nation can be affected through a referendum that goes wrong. So this is why understanding the power of disinformation and coming up with strategies to counter it is so vitally important for democracy. There is some sociological and anthropological research showing that we humans are more likely to believe a lie. A lie is more likely, several times more likely to spread than a fact. Of course, this can vary from culture to culture. Generally, many people don't have critical thinking skills developed in them. Our education systems don't prepare us to be skeptical enough, to be critical in what we receive as information. So many of us, despite education, despite professional accomplishment, can be misled by careful, devious disinformation campaigns. And we can see many examples of this. There is advertising also that is deliberately misleading consumers, and that is also, there is an element of disinformation there. But worse than that is political disinformation, which is rising. And so what is wrong with people? I think it's the nature of the human mind to seek comfort. So if I have already a set of prejudices about, say, something about a political group or a particular minority group, and if I am told something that is simply not true or only partially true, I am likely to believe it because it reinforces my existing set of prejudices. So the comforting lies are often preferred by many people rather than the inconvenient truths or rather than the uncertainties, because in some cases the truth is not so self-evident. The truth needs to be figured out, and that entails work, mental effort, and it's much easier, for example, to believe that global warming or COVID, there are many myths about COVID-19. It's easier to seek refuge in these myths or misconceptions rather than grapple with uncertainties, the rapidly evolving new knowledge that keeps coming. For example, in the case of COVID, nobody knows the full facts about COVID, but we know enough, for example, that it is not made in a laboratory either in China or in the US or anywhere else. It has emerged from the wild and jumped onto human beings at some point. Now, there are many unknowns there, uncertainties, and that's why these conspiracy theories, which are neat, which are already kind of pandering to existing fears and paranoias in many of our minds. The conspiracy theory says, hey, COVID-19 is a virus that was manufactured. A lot of people, including some educated people, tend to quickly believe that. We are not critical enough in terms of evaluating what we receive. This is the skill, the most important skill, survival skill for the 21st century. The skill to evaluate and critically examine all information. Yes, definitely. We see political disinformation getting heightened during election campaigns. Let's be honest, elections for a very long time in Sri Lanka, in many parts of South Asia, elections have been a time, it's a festival, it's a carnival of lies. Candidates and political parties promise all sorts of things. They claim credit for things that they have not done or not really fully done. They demonize the opponents and other candidates. So, and election campaigns have always been full of exaggerations, deceptions, false promises and the like. What is new and alarming is that the new tools like social media enables these lies to be customized. For example, Facebook users, there is a profile for each Facebook user. Your political likes and dislikes and your fears are different from mine. So what happens is these profiles can be accessed, or if they are accessed by political campaigners, election campaigners, they can, instead of one big fat lie being mass produced and broadcast to everyone alike, they can customize that lie in different ways, and a lot of this can be automated, and therefore the lie that I receive is somehow customized to address my worst fears and or to address to my likes or dislikes, and what somebody else sees in that campaign is different. So therefore the tools have become more precise, more differentiated, and therefore the campaigns, political disinformation campaigns, are becoming more and more customized to individuals and therefore more sinister. Now we need to, election authorities, the election commissions, the election monitoring agencies, democratic institutions, political parties, all of us, and voters of course, all of us need to be aware of new ways and tools of manipulating public mind, especially in times of elections, but also in between elections, when we as voters need to hold governments to account. Democracy does not end after an election day. In fact, that's only a part of a much larger engagement between citizens and those who are elected as people's representatives. From between one election to another, how do we hold governments to account? We need data. We need economic statistics. We need other kinds of official statistics. If this data is manipulated, or if the media does not tell us the full picture but only tells us the rosy bits and pieces of that picture, then how can we as citizens evaluate the performance of governments we have elected for a fixed term? So therefore, particularly at election times, but also at all other times, democracy needs reliable, trustworthy information. It's almost like the fuel that helps societies, modern societies to function, modern governance to function. And if that fuel is corrupted, if there is, say, if you add sand into the gasoline or the petrol tank of a vehicle, the whole engine will malfunction and grind to a halt. The same thing is happening with lots of disinformation entering public information sphere. The fuel, the lubricant that runs governance and governments and relations with citizens is getting affected. We need to address this. Disinformation can be of many different types, and their impact can also vary. Now, I did a little analysis in order to understand COVID-19 related disinformation that has been spreading for much of 2020. Now, the International Fact-Checking Network, which kind of brings together different fact-checking groups around the world, including some in Sri Lanka, they started a database of COVID-19 disinformation in February. And by July 2020, there have been several thousand specific disinformation pieces, specific lies, fabrications, conspiracy theories around COVID-19 alone. It has become a rallying point for all producers of disinformation. But not all disinformation is the same. So I kind of looked at the ability to do harm and organize them from category 1 to category 5. Let me very quickly share that with you. So in category 1 is where I place self-delusion, which is disinformation that is relatively harmless, except of course misinforming ourselves. We lull ourselves into some kind of a delusion. And these conspiracy theories about COVID-19, the virus being manufactured in a laboratory somewhere is in this first category. Then the second category is it has the potential to harm individuals. For example, unverified claims that various plants or behavior types can give immunity against this virus. Now, all sorts of claims have been made. Some products have entered the market claiming that this will give you protection from virus. Nothing that we know of in terms of what we ingest or what we apply can protect us. It's only hand hygiene and social distancing, the basic precautions that public health officials have been telling us all along. So second category can harm individuals. The third category is the potential to harm not only yourself but also a family and a community. For example, wrong information that COVID-19 does not affect younger people. Now there was a belief like that early days of the pandemic. Oh, if you are young, you are okay. That is simply not true. Increasingly, more and more young people and people of all ages have been infected and have been among those who lost their lives. There have been claims that vaccines against COVID has been developed. At this point, in mid-August 2020, there is not yet a vaccine that can be administered to the public. So that's the third category. The fourth category is potential harm that can be done at local or national levels. An example is trying to distort the public health responses taken by governments. Questioning, for example, the efficacy of lockdowns or curfews and saying that these are in fact disproportionately high and unnecessary and so on. This sort of thing can really affect public confidence and compliance of these measures by government. So again, that's very damaging. But the worst kind, the category 5, is dangerous or provocative lies that can lead to stigma of those who are infected by the virus, or trigger physical violence. For example, that certain minorities are deliberately spreading this virus. This lie has been spread in different countries attached to different minorities, and that is very, very damaging in multicultural, multi-ethnic societies. So from the harmless, which is, okay, we delude ourselves, we kid ourselves about something, to where physical violence can erupt from a lie. So there is a full spectrum in COVID-19 disinformation. So like that, we can analyze it for other areas as well. To counter disinformation, we need to therefore map it and analyze and rank the types of disinformation. So what can be done? Disinformation is here, it's growing, and it is drowning public discourse. What can be done? 2 or 3 things. Governments can do one thing: stop lying to your own citizens. Be as truthful, as transparent as possible with public health information and all other information. So government setting the standard for data integrity, for honesty, for telling the citizens the truth, even if it is an inconvenient truth. That is one thing that we should look for, we should advocate for. Two, the organized or the established media can definitely also be the trendsetters by always respecting the basics of journalism: facts, figures, analysis. And if you don't know something, the full picture is not yet known, telling your audiences that it is an evolving, emerging story, and telling as much as you know and not speculating, and definitely not deliberately lying and spreading disinformation. Civil society can play a part. Civil society can fact check. Now there are increasingly third-party fact checkers. What it means is that they look at what public figures say. Politicians and celebrities and sometimes researchers make all sorts of claims about the economy, claims about political scenarios, and claims about public health. Are these based on facts? What are the facts? Are these statements giving us the full picture, or only a small part of a much more complex reality? Fact checkers go after, they go and dig for the sources, look for the evidence, and therefore they come up and say, okay, this is true, this is partly true, and this is false. So fact checking is a very necessary service these days. And in Sri Lanka, we now have at least 2 entirely homegrown fact checking services, as well as 2 international fact checking services that are covering Sri Lanka. So these are necessary, but they are not sufficient. In the long term, what we need is for everyone to be able to critically evaluate information they receive. It's like this. The analogy I have is this. The virus, the COVID-19 virus is out there. We don't know where it is. We can't see it. And one option is to go sanitizing and disinfecting every surface and every place in the public space, as well as inside our homes and offices. How much of disinfecting can we do? Another approach is we can look after our own hand hygiene. We can make sure that we are careful with sanitizers, with hand washing and social distancing. Each individual taking responsibility. So similarly, no matter how much of fact checking is there, no matter how much of mass scale countering of disinformation is there, every individual also has to play a part. We need to develop the equivalent of hand hygiene, that is the information hygiene, the information precautions, the safety and critical thinking with regard to information. We need to be able to evaluate what we hear, what we are told, never accept anything uncritically, and that is the kind of thing. Now, in the long term, media literacy, information literacy is a kind of intellectual vaccine. A vaccine for our minds, to guard our minds against being infected by corrupted information, by manipulation, by lies, fabrications, conspiracy theories. So that intellectual vaccine is called information literacy and digital literacy or media literacy. Every individual in modern societies needs to get that vaccine. That's the only surefire way to guard against the impacts of disinformation.